So sometimes it's interesting to have these type of chats. And maybe just to put certain things into perspective, at the end of 76, when we came across to Parachute Battalion, a whole lot of young second lieutenants and a whole lot of young corporals, as maybe some of you would be aware of, and then the first thing they get their hands on is PT course, and the second thing they get their hands on are the oaks doing basics. And a lot of these guys that were with us then all wanted to, after paratrooper course, they wanted to go to the recce's because that was now the next step. And we were only two SOTIs in this group, Peter Bowles and myself. And all the ropes all wanted to become recce's, and the two of us just shut our mouths. At the end of the time, and after a whole lot of periods and things like that, there were only two oaks who became recce's, and those were the two SOTIs. And unfortunately, Peter died a couple of years ago of cancer, but may his soul rest in peace. He was a very good friend of mine. All right, so what I want to do is I just want to show you a video. Last year, October, we had our 50th anniversary, and we had a whole lot of celebrations over that weekend where a whole lot of operators came together. And it's interesting, up until now, we are just over 1,300 operators from 1972 onwards. That gives you an average of about 23 guys per year. Last year, March, the last guys qualified. The guys are currently on cycle, and we had 8 guys qualified. So it's been a long period of things to go through, but we have now been through 50 years. This video was the celebration of the 50 years. So I'd just like to share this with you. What I'd also like to give you a bit of an insight into is we put together a presentation between Colonel Hannes Venter, Colonel Charles Lundberg, General Officer, Major General Steve Maloma, Colonel Yalu, and Colonel Lechwanu. The two last colonels that I mentioned are current serving operators. General Maloma was the previous General Officer Commander of Special Forces. Hannes Venter and Charles Lundberg were instrumental in Special Forces growth. And we put together a presentation of 2.5 hours, which we presented to the South African Military Veterans Association of Australia and New Zealand. And the Oaks were absolutely gobsmacked. And what's going to happen now is we're going to use this presentation in going back into Special Forces and all the youngsters currently in Special Forces, taking them through this so that they actually understand the history and why we do certain things the way that we do certain things. So just as an example, what came up there, and I want to share this with you because I think it's important. If you go and understand what's happening in Mozambique at the moment, we have Special Forces there, but it's part and parcel of a broader task force with Rwandans, Botswana, Special Forces, etc., and a whole lot of guys there. And the guys in head office cannot understand why the guys want different weapons. Because in a Special Forces team, the way that they're operating there, there's always a Dragunov with them as a sniper weapon. The bush is so dense there. It's taking 9 hours for a team to move 2 kilometers. That's the nature of the bush. So you can think, if you were a section or a falk trying to move through that bush, at that rate, you can't even see the oak next to you. Let alone get into a firing line. Let alone setting an ambush. Because where do you set this ambush? So what the Lapkoppe do, and the people who don't understand the term Lapkoppe, that's are the Al-Shabaab guys, what they do is they use the paths. But they walk 1 to 2 kilometers apart. So you have to change your whole way of thinking and your whole way of operating, because how do you set an ambush? When oaks are 1 to 2 kilometers apart, you can't. So they have now resorted to snatch type operations where they snatch oaks and all that type of stuff. However, you can be the hardest soldier, the best trained soldier in the world. When they're walking down the paths where these guys are walking and they're getting close to the areas where the Al-Shabaab is, they're coming across a stake in the ground with the baby's head on the stake. And around the stake and further along the path are the parts of the baby. That will break and crack anyone. Doesn't matter who you are. And there's a fundamental difference in the war that we are fighting there. The guys that we are fighting against are there to die. We are there to win the war. It's a different operating philosophy, and it's a different enemy that we are fighting. So what we're going to do in understanding what our guys currently, operators and things, are the type of challenges that they are facing in that part of the world. And it's not far from it. And that's reality. So if we think we as glorified paratroopers could fight the war, it's a different thing what the oaks are involved with these days. So let's just respect and understand that. So let me just go into this video for you. Where's the sound?
These volunteers are highly trained and skilled. Dedication, ability, and camaraderie make them legends. In the early 70s, the legend founded by the nucleus of South Africa's
That's as loud as we can go.
Force,
Sorry.
better known as the Dirty Dozen. In
Okay, so
1972, one reconnaissance
okay,
commander
this whole video gives a very clear depiction of what goes on in special forces. So the establishment of 1 commando, 2 commando, 3 commando, with what we were involved with, initially airborne and seaborne, and then we went into pseudo operations. And these are fundamental in the way that special forces was done. So 1 reconnaissance was the start, 4 reconnaissance was the airborne side, 5 reconnaissance was the pseudo operations. And then there was a whole development of the seaborne side in 78 into okay. All right, so you can just listen now.
And support unit based in Pretoria. In 1996, the organization became better known as the Special Forces Brigade, and in 2002, the Special Forces School for Training became a standalone unit.
And that's now Valmanstal. So where 44 used to be.
Still are characterized by their frequent operational deployment and successes on an unprecedented scale. They're expected to execute operations under varying circumstances and in conditions that often seem humanly impossible. Special Forces candidates are volunteers who hail from all walks of life, regardless of race, creed, or political dispositions. In order to qualify as a fully fledged operator, the candidate has to undergo different stages of selection and training. The extended and arduous training cycle is enhanced by advanced and specialized courses requiring prospective members to successfully conduct special operations. During periods of conflict, the Special Forces enhance the versatility of joint forces by conducting specialist reconnaissance as well as offensive operations. As a strike force, they have the capability to destroy or disrupt specific targets, including military infrastructure, command and control systems, as well as lines of communication. The impact of the Special Forces is of a strategic nature and may contribute to an achievement of national objectives.
And most of this you're seeing now is current.
Counter-terrorism operations, precision strikes on military objectives, or intelligence gathering during times of war. Historic involvement in wide-ranging, drawn-out and complex operations has brought about the development of new tactics and equipment. Bushcraft and survival skills in the African wilds, and a unique approach to long-range independent missions. The many years of experience in special operations and the knowledge of individual special operators has made it the best in Africa. A force to be reckoned with. Today, a bond exists amongst all those who have served and indeed still serve within the South African Special Forces. Being part of this proud and unique organization with its own traditions as each member becomes a part of its history. The ultimate challenge defined by strength, stealth, and service. We fear not, but God.
So just a couple of interesting things on this. So if you see all the components that Special Forces do, and you go and pull that together and you go and try and evaluate and match that against Special Forces across various countries in the world, you don't get that. That our Special Forces cover all of those things. You get different types of operations that are covered by different groups within their forces. So, for instance, if you take the US, your SEALs do X, your Rangers do Y, these guys do that. If you look at the South African force, we do all of that. So it creates a lot of a requirement on diversity within the training and the ability to execute. The other thing that you saw, there was a parade just now where you saw the old flags and the new flags. At our memorial parade, we always have at Special Forces headquarters, and it's the only one in the country where they fly the old flags and the new flags together, because Special Forces has always been an integrated service right from the start. So it's always a good thing to go there and experience that within that organization. So let me get down into the presentation then. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about in particular is Operation Drosdy. Drosdy is a very interesting operation, and the reason that we talk to it and we use it is that it is an operation that comes from, we did the initial reconnaissance. Months later, we then went and did the operation. After many years, we had major interaction with the Russians, and we've got all the material that was eminent after the operation that was never accessible to us, which we now have got access to the extent that there's been a movie made about Maxim Oberonov, who was one of the guys who lifted the mines here. And there's a movie made of him in Russia because he is classified as one of their heroes. And they refer completely to this operation that we executed here. So why is this operation so significant? It is the largest clandestine force that was ever deployed in the by the South African Navy. And obviously, the largest group of Special Forces guys, and viewed by many in Russia as the most successful clandestine diving operation against them since World War I. And they termed this Operation Sea Fox with respect to the impact that went afterwards. And obviously, the comics had a lot to say about it. So just an introduction, it was covered in previously, an introduction to Special Forces Regiment, 4 Special Forces Regiment, which used to be called 4 Reconnaissance Regiment, which used to be called 4 Reconnaissance Commando. So the brief history. During Savannah, there was a need identified to start a seaborne capability. And that was then became a subunit in 1 Recce in Durban. Then they created the need to set up a unit, and this was done in Langebaan, 77. 4 Recce came into being in Langebaan. In 1993, 4 Recce, as all the other Special Forces, were disbanded. And they then became 453, 454, and 45 Para Brigade. And it became a nightmare because there was nobody who understood in the parachute and military, how to deploy special forces, Nelson Mandela and them after a while said, no. And Ronnie Castles revert back. We go back to special forces. And then it was renamed back to Special Forces Regiment. And that's the way that it then happened. So seaborne is the way that we move in 4-Recce. We are a seaborne unit, primarily using the Navy and other mechanisms. Occasionally, just to get ourselves right again, they would take some of us and they send us to the bush so we can just go and maintain our skill sets in that environment, which is always interesting for us because we were not so handy in the bush at times. We were normally known within the group as the Kreefrekkies. Hey, Mark?
We've never really come.
Just the seaborne operator, after qualifying as a special forces operator, having gone through the whole cycle, the guys that get posted to 4-Recce have to go through another 6 to 8 months cycle before you qualify as a seaborne operator. So you've got to go and do all your seaborne skills. Those that go on to diving become diving skills and everything like that. And a big part of it is the whole learning how to work in the water, learning how to collaborate with the Navy, learning how to swim and work in the water at night. Key. So what does their seaborne training entail? Water work, boat work, small boat work, handling of boats, parachute, all the type of stuff, the collaboration with the Navy, landing. So this looks nice. So all the boat guys, the ski boat guys, doing their fishing. We carried 18, 12 guys on these boats and do surf landings and beaches at night, dark moon, in this. And you go and do Richards Bay and these areas, not fun. A lot of work at night, and then obviously underwater demolition. So those are all the key components that you undergo in your training. And then we have a very special relationship with the Navy, as depicted over here. Strikecraft over there. And Strikecraft, we went through projects to be able to carry our Barracuda boats. The Barracuda boats are derived from shark sport. The shark sport boats that they use here, the Acecraft. That was the initial design. And obviously it morphed into what we needed. And now they've morphed it into more of a specialized boat as well. But there were specific ramps defined and developed there so that we could launch and collect these boats on the Strikecraft. When we did that, they took off the back gun and put our boats on top. There you got some Strikecraft at Donkergat, obviously on the submarine. Here you can see the boats on the Strikecraft. A lot of work with Tafelberg, Drakensberg, Tafelberg, submarines, and PP before she died. And then obviously our biggest need was the Uber for Recce's. And that they were only more reliable than the current Uber. But the Strikecraft flotilla was a huge component of our work in being able to take us and move us around. All our clandestine work, submarines. So, just a bit about the pig, because this operation talks to you a lot about the pig. The pig is the sub. This is what it's like trying to work on the deck of a sub. You can see there's very little space, so we've got to get our boats up here, prepped and ready, all in the dock. And that on top there is the conning tower. That's where they sit and they monitor what's going on and when you're on surface. A bit more. We used to call it the diesel-driven drain pipe. The best whale sighting ever when you're waiting for somebody to come and fetch you. But just also, some of the things, 50 submariners plus 6 special forces crew on board. That's what they could carry. That's 56 bodies. Hot bunking in this area. In here you can see the hot bunking. So 2 shifts, so the oaks are continuously swapping the bunking. Special forces, these are the forward torpedoes. We would hang hammocks here. This is where we would stay and live in hammocks on that in that period. Condensation, it's like a rainforest in there. So when you get up to Angola, it is continuously raining inside the submarine of the condensation. Dehumidifiers, the smell and personal hygiene doesn't exist. And showers, there are no showers. So when you go onto operations, it's the only time that you can shower. But the problem is the water is so hard that soap doesn't lather. So to try and get Black is Beautiful off becomes quite a nightmare. So you might just live with it for the period. Okay, side and Drosdy. So we were tasked to inflict maximum disruption on all the enemy logistic supply lines which originated out of Namibe. Now Namibe being a major port, so you got Luanda, Lobito, and Namibe. And especially in the 86, 85, 86 era, there was a huge amount of logistics that were moving through Namibe, through to the east, where all the big operations were going, especially around Carnival, that area, Ops, Hooper, Paka, and all of those, all that stuff happening over there. So part and parcel of the operation was, let's go and disrupt the supply lines. But to be able to do that, we had to do two operations. Side was the reconnaissance, and Drosdy was the operation itself. So just so that you get a picture again, as a reminder, as many of you know, the Angolan theatre, you had all the operations running in these areas. Here's Namibe, the main supply line into there, Lobito over here, and then Luanda. So all of that going down there. So our task was to disrupt this main line coming in here. So we were tasked, and I was tasked with this operation. 16th of February to the 14th of March. That's the time we were on the submarine. So before this, all the preparation that took place, everything, and then we ran. The boat, commanded by Jan Rabe, and then my team was myself, Johan Hechter, Martin Kelly, Benji Burke, Phil Haps, Pedrito, and we were going to use two inflatables, 2 K50s. So on that, we've got to have fuel. Before we did the reconnaissance on site, we actually went to Lobito and did some work in Lobito as well. Very interesting about that one was when we did our first launch into Lobito, I'd been on the casing, we got everything prepared. And then I went up to the conning tower just to finalize on the conning tower. And when I came down from the conning tower, there was a storm coming in already. And as I looked back at the conning tower, there was St. Elmo's fire going over the whole submarine. Around all the guys' heads that were standing on the conning tower and back into the water, this blue-orange light going across there. And I thought to myself, what do I do? Do we carry on? I don't know what the storm is going to do. Or do we call it? And the reason I'm telling you this is that there is only one oak who makes that call. There is no general who can tell you before in briefings that you make this call. He can't tell you because he doesn't know the stuff on the ground. There's only one guy that makes the call to call it or to go. And you take the consequence of that. Okay. That night I called it because the storm was coming, so I called it. Back up, go down, we come back the next night. Next night, pure, clean, no problem. We could do everything we wanted. In the harbour, went to all the places, did all the photography, in amongst the ships. It was great, no problems. And then we came down to Namibe, and then we had to execute on Namibe the reconnaissance. So on the 18th of Feb, we departed Donkergat, 1,500 nautical miles. Just look at that, submerged. She runs at 15 knots, that's 28 kilometers an hour. Snorkeling at 8 knots, and on surface 12 knots. A hippo runs faster underwater on a river than the submarine. So the 26th to the 28th of February, we did the reconnaissance on Lobito that I mentioned. And then on the 4th of March, we went in with the inflatable boats into Namibe. And then on the 14th of March, we arrived back in Langebaan. So the time on board was 24 days. And that's a key thing because you now keeping an operator in this environment for 24 days, it's very difficult because you cannot keep your levels of fitness. You've got to keep the oaks busy. What do you keep the oaks busy with in a space like this? If you go into a submarine, you're probably sitting, oaks are sleeping there, oaks are sleeping here, and here's the gangway. That's how big it is inside. And how do you keep your oaks going? We watch lots of movies, and a lot of our guys qualified on some of the systems. So the recce. So we went in first into the harbour on the 4th of March. The submarine went into the harbour because it's a very deep harbour, and she put up the periscope, and we looked at everything. I could see the town, I could see all the target areas that we were interested in, and I could watch MiGs taking off from the airfield. And we were lying in the harbour watching all of this with a periscope. Amazing. Then we went out at 20. We also identified there were two OSA class missile boats, but we weren't too worried about them because they don't have any electronic intelligence capability. 2100 hours, we launched 5 nautical miles northwest of the Gerald Point, and this is the Gerald Point over here. So just about there, we launched and then came in. And what we did was, we ran in, and we went here to the iron ore jetty. We went over here to go and understand areas where we could launch ground attacks. We went to go and check this area for potential emergency RVs, and then we went into the town. Yeah. And the interesting part, around here must have been about midnight when we got to here, and we were just outside the surf line. And there was a lot of partying going on in town. And the next thing, there's gunfire. I got such a spook, I moved off the boat. Everybody had heart palpitations. We got me back on the boat. But what had happened was they were having a party in town, and at midnight somebody started shooting, and all the oaks started shooting into the air. So anyway, we just carried on. But there was another thing in that. So when it comes back to the training, that's where you got the confidence to be able to work on the water and to work with boats and also to work inside the water. Because I never realized until I had done the training that it's extremely difficult to see a guy in the water if you're looking for him and you don't know what you're looking for. In our training, we did an exercise in PE Harbour where we had to surface swim in and go and mark the Namakura boats that were alongside the jetty at the PE naval base. They had the naval police looking for us, and they had the army looking for us, and the navy looking for us. And at one stage, I was lying probably from here to the door from a guy, and I was just watching him, watching his eyes. And he was there. He couldn't see us. And the next morning, when they woke up, they found the crosses on the boats. And nobody saw us coming in, and nobody saw us coming out. So that's where you get the confidence of being able to work in these things. Working the boats in the water just outside the surf line in a town. So you start getting a lot of confidence in how you need to operate. 4:30, we RV'd with the submarine. And the way that we RV'd is we would run out from a point on a time and distance. Mark, I was a major by then, so we could work a compass. We ran in on a heading and a distance. We knew how fast the motor was going, and when we got to a specific point, we stopped. We dropped the pinger in the water, and the next thing, submarine pops up next to you. Load, and we go. Then we got to Drosdy. Drosdy happened June that year. But we started a lot of planning and everything before then. So Drosdy, we went through preparation phase. Phase 1 was the deployment. Phase 2, reconnaissance. Phase 3, the simultaneous attack. And phase 4, the withdrawal to Langeban and Simonstown. And there was a very interesting thing given here. And that's a very interesting point, that before any operation, there is absolute clarity on what the Navy may do and may not do. And the reason for that is, if the Navy fires a shot into a foreign country, it is tantamount to a declaration of war.
Only the Navy.
The Navy, because there are just certain components in the way that certain of the
Bomb the hell out of it.
you can do, but if they fire a shot in, then it's a tantamount to a declaration of war. There was handwritten permission given to the strike craft that if there was kak, that they had permission to be able to do this, but you would not see that in any of the orders. Okay. So it was there. We had a backup. Just the command and control of this operation, and I use this to actually show you the magnitude of what we had in there. So we had Pierre Lundberg as the boss, the Naval Task Group Commander Jock Deacon, Operations Commander Hannes Venter, Alternative Ops Commander Taffy Hubert. I was the Tactical Reconnaissance Commander. Krubik Nell, Attack Team Dive 1, Attack Dive Commander 1, Attack Dive Commander 2, Johan Hechter, Raiding Party Drosdy. I also held the beachhead and early warning during the operation itself. Boat Commanders Fred Wilke. We had the submarine again, the same submarine with the same boss. 3 strike craft, 6 Barracuda boats, Tafelberg, 2 helicopters, our comms team, tactical HQ and the hospital, and then 58 Special Forces operators. That's the makeup of the force. So if you're just going to have a look at that and depict that, 6 of those, 1 of the Drakensberg, 1 submarine, 3 strike craft, 2 inflatables, 27 landward operators, 2 Puma helicopters, and 13 divers. If you go back to the magnitude of the bay, that bay, 8 kilometers by 5 kilometers. We were going to execute this operation in that bay with no radio comms. So everything was planned with time. Timings. So you cannot break the timings. If you break timings, you either stop your component and withdraw. This is the teams that participated. The reason I put this up is because there are 30,000 other wannabes out there. So if you weren't there, this is the guys that were there. There's a number of guys here who are dead, and we respect them. So, Ops Command, that sat on the strike craft, on Tafelberg. We did this off the submarine at first, and I'll explain it to you. The raiding teams on Kubikutsia, early warning team, myself on 1561, the dive team 1 on 1561, boat 1 on KCE, boat 2 on KCE, boat 4 on 1561. This boat, we put a 20mm cannon, we built a 20mm cannon onto that boat. And Rui Janguero was the man who was that thing. And he was praying all the time that something would go wrong, that we could launch this thing. That's all he wanted, to be able to fire this thing off there. So during the preparation phase, here's our dates. So the 14th to the 26th of May, the dive team prepares. Tactical recce team and the small team exercise with the submarine in the Langebaan area. That was my team. And the 26th to the 28th of May, the raiding and attack divers teams rehearsed with the Barracudas and with the strike craft. And then the 29th of May, we did our final rehearsals. Just on this, the dive team spent 2 to 3 months preparation before these exercises. My team, in the tactical recce side, we did a lot of work before, but we were also au fait with what we were going to do because we'd been on the submarine before on the same process. The raiding teams did a lot of work in the bay on the fuel farms that are there in the Saldanha Bay area, breaching and all that type of stuff. Nights in, nights out, nights in, nights out. So just a lot of the work on the dive team. So key component was pack and carry of equipment, fully functional mechanisms on the mines, and the EMLC. Because they were using specific mines that they were going to carry in to put on the ships. The raiding team, the same, had different types of mines. We had 2 sets of mechanisms that we were going to use. But just on the Navy, the dive team, this was all the work that they had to do. And this was the equipment that they had to carry in or use, and then still carry their webbing, their escape and evasion kit, and also the mines that they were going to use. So some guys were carrying 2 mines. No cell phones, GPSs. Okay. During phase 1, 23rd of May, Johanna came in and we loaded all our equipment onto her and she left. Because we didn't want to go and spend another 24 days or 15 days getting to target. So she left with all our equipment. 28th of May, 1561 departed Donkergat with my team on board. So we were going to RV with JDM. 29th of May, Tafelberg departs. 30th of May, KC and Hendrik Mens depart. And we had the time on target 2nd to the 13th of June. So you can see all of a sudden you got all this activity going out of that area. So can you imagine you had this new app, Ship Tracker, marine tracking, and somebody was watching marine tracking now. You can see he compressed copies. There's a lot of stuff. So, these are the challenges that, that's what we could do in those days. You try and do something like this. It's amazing where we were in those days. So during the execution, phase 2 was the reconnaissance to confirm the targets. So on the 30th of May, Johanna went again in on her own and did periscope depth. Those OSA ships we saw weren't there. On the 31st, she RV'd with the strike craft and we transferred onto the submarine. On the 1st of June, we did the reconnaissance. We first went in again. We did the periscope. We went out. 2000 we launched. I dropped the small team of Frans Fourie and Pedrito so that they were going to do the walk to the oil farm. Then we went and did the shore recce at the Sacco Key. And then also we went in to all the dive areas where the guys were going to go. And we also went to the emergency RV. Showed everybody everything. Picked up the reconnaissance team that were on line. And then we went back to the submarine. And we decided there, Hannes Venter and myself and Doe and everybody, we decided right there, we don't need another reconnaissance. We've got all that we need. We can now go in. We don't want to compromise anything. Everything is cool. So we ran back and she transferred us back onto the strike craft. And then she stayed in the area and constantly did reconnaissance. And then we set the D-Day for the 3rd of June. So these were the target areas. On the left there, you see that's the Sacco oil key. And there, the second green arrow is the oil farm. And this is the harbour itself, the town going over here. These are Google Maps. We didn't have those type of maps then. We had some good maps, but not as clear as what we can see over there. So then we had the execution, and this was going to be the simultaneous attack that was going to run in this whole operation. Now you must understand, you've got 2 dive teams in different directions. You've got an attack team that's going to do one thing over there. You've got a holding team that's going to hold the beachfront. And you've got boats that are working in this whole area. There's 6 boats that are maneuvering and moving these people around and RVing and everything. No radio call. Only, yeah, it was if there was an emergency, but the whole op was planned, no radio call, everything on timings. Okay. On D-Day, we started the countdown, 1 o'clock, 50 nautical miles on the strike craft. All the mines were armed and everything like that. We planned the Barracuda launch time at 2000 hours. We aborted the launch because there was a problem on one of the ramps at KCE because it couldn't lift, so we couldn't drop a boat. So we called the operation. Everybody back on board, clean up again, go to sleep. Next day we start the process again. But the interesting thing is, and this is where I say sometimes things work, sometimes they don't work. That night, there were 2 neutral Greek and Italian vessels in the harbor. Passenger vessels, small passenger vessels. If we had gone in that night, those things would have been taken. That would have been a disaster. The next night, countdown commenced. The JDM was in the harbor. She confirmed the targets. So we ran in 5 nautical miles, ideal sea conditions, and the boats ran. And we ran in, and at a point we split. 1 boat to there, 2 boats there, 2 boats down there. 2 boats, sorry. And we dropped off the team. Is there power for this?
Yeah.
For the computer? It's saying it's losing power.
By the wall.
Okay, cool. So then, dive team 1, they were going to hit, and there was, on the iron ore jetty, there was a big LP gas ship. That was their target. They were going to hit that LP gas ship. And in the harbor itself, there was quite a big LP gas bore. So they were on their way, and they'd started the approach, and then the ship moved and actually sailed off. And here's another thing that happened. If that ship had had the mines on and had sailed, those mines would have gone off because they were tamper. And if that had gone off while we were all still busy inside the harbor with all the other stuff, it would have been absolute chaos. So the guys had to pull back, much to their disappointment. The raiding party, we dropped them off, and my team, there was quite a huge shore break, so we had to help a lot of the guys out. And then Doe and them, they did the walk in, and we had 2 mechanisms that we were going to use. We were either going to breach and place the mines on the tanks, or we were going to, and so that was like a limpet type mine, or we had the alternative, we had RPG specially built with a timer mechanism that would fire the RPG, and just after it would have a self-destruct mechanism whereby it would blow itself up. So there was no evidence of what you could get on that thing. So when Doe got in there, they noticed there was some activity in. So what they decided to do was to do a standoff. From my side, from the beach side, we also had standoff rockets. So we also put our rockets up for that. And then Doe, being an engineer, decided, we've brought all these mines along with us. We're not taking them back. So on the way out, they placed it on every single railway coach, engine, railway line, pylon, which was not actually in the orders, but they got placed. When they came back, the sea had got so bad that we actually had to dump, a lot of us had to dump our ammunition in the water so that we could help the oaks swim in. There's the third thing. If they had those mines with them, it would have been a problem. So that's why I say this operation was some good things that happened, and the stars were shining for us. Anyway, so everything was loaded, and everything was placed. We returned to the beachhead, we swam them through, and then the boats moved to RV. On the dive, the main dive side, so they have to go through a whole prelude into that because they're going to go on oxygen, rebreather sets. Okay? So there was quite a lot of work that they had to go through it. So that's just part of the preparation. So once they had got to about 1.2 miles from the boats, from the ships, the boat stopped, they exited, they swam. They met, they grouped, they identified the various targets that were there. There were 3 ships, and they went down. And they went for their ships, and they went down. What we didn't know at that stage is that the Russians had anti-dive techniques because we had never seen Russian ships in that harbor. And every now and then they would throw grenades into the water. And the guys were on the final approach and grenades went down. One team thought that that was the callback, so they withdrew. Johan Hechter and Benji Bird, the tug came along. They had to do an emergency dive below the limit for closed diving. Okay? Benji picked up a problem. Eventually they all recovered, and then they went and attacked the targets. And they placed their mines on the various ships. Our doctrine is to place the mine astern. What we've learned thereafter, those ships were so laden with ammo that if we had placed the charges midships, it would have been like a nuclear explosion in that harbor. Anyway, so the guys did all their stuff, withdrew, got everybody together, back onto the boats. They had to bring the boats in quicker, so we used strobes, infrared strobes, where the guys are able to see that. Get in closer, pick up the guys because we were having a problem with Benji. Picked up the guys, everybody RV'd, and then we ran out to the strike craft. Got to the strike craft, loaded, strike craft, foot in the book, daar gaat ons. And around about 5:30, just after 5 in the morning, we were all standing on the decks of the strike craft, and you could start see it happening. The flashes start happening. So, down, and then the strike craft ran. So, what happened? The Angolans jumped the MiGs. The MiGs turned where they last picked up some sort of thought they had a signal, but we were long gone. All these explosions happened. And the question always remains, you on board the strike craft, you've done all this, but you've got no view of what the impact of this thing is. No view. So the question always is, was the operation successful? So firstly, Johanna moved back into the harbor at periscope depth. So this is, old Jan Rabie was a brave man, going back into the harbor with all this cuck had now happened, and we went and had a look, and he confirmed there was the fuel farm was ablaze, except the LPG tank and one reservoir. One locomotive was destroyed. 3 of the 4 ships were listing alongside the quay. 2 Russian ships, and then the Havana was a Cuban cargo ship. 12,000 tons, 16,000 tons, and 6,000 tons. According to the Russian literature, the 3 ships were packed with 30,000 tons of weapons and ammunition that was supposed to go to the east. So we asked the question, was the operation successful? Yeah. What happened? At 4 o'clock, 3 detonated simultaneously on Captain Chikov. 5:33, this is now from the Russian literature. The fuel farm blew. Captain Vishlybekov followed immediately thereafter, and her crew, assisted with Captain Chikov, rushed back to save their own ship. Havana perished somewhere in between. 8:40, the Angolans realized it was a seaborne raid, and they called for the MiGs. And at 9:34, MiGs were dispatched from Kamhama, but we were already long gone. There are the ships. 3 mines, 2 mines. That's the Havana, Captain Chikov, and Captain Vishlybekov. So the impact of this, the Russian President Gorbachev at the time almost cut off his visit to Poland. He was busy visiting Poland. They tasked the Russian forces to go and rescue the Russian ships. They sent the Spetsnaz unit from Moscow with the IL-76. There was far more increased activity coming down the coast. The loss of ammunition and supplies delayed the move to retake the strategic town of Mavinga. So the Cubans and the Russians and the Angolans were going to take Mavinga, so everything had to be delayed because they had no more ammo to be able to do this. This allowed for the counter-strike by South African forces on Cuito Carnival and the disruption of the stockpile fuel and ammunitions. The interesting part, the only medals for bravery awarded for this operation were 6 Russians who were flown out to salvage this operation. 3 orders of the Red Star, which given to the officers, and 3 distinctions in military service, of which Maxim Oborov is one of them. And that's the guy who the movie was made of. And it's very interesting because they came to South Africa, they made the movie here in South Africa and everything. They flew Drosdy to Russia to go and meet Maxim's mother. The whole movie, it's amazing to watch the movie. It's about a 55-minute movie. And obviously the Russian story is they were successful, but at the end of the day, like one of those. So what was the aftermath? Was this operation too effective? This couldn't go unpunished, so the Russians were pissed off. Okay, 10th of June, the Russians wanted compensation. Okay, on the 18th of June, and here's a key rider, the Security Council of the United Nations voted on a draft resolution on the condemning of and sanctions against South Africa for a premeditated, unprovoked attack on Namibe and the continued occupation of territories of that state. So even the United Nations were the hell in with us about this. But the other interesting, no further attacks or raids of this nature were ever conducted by Special Forces again. This was the last big one.
South Africa denied any involvement.
What? So, here are some of the comics. Red Slink SAA in sea raid on oil targets. And it's very interesting. If you look at it from a Russian perspective, the Russians see this as a pure dive attack against them. They actually forget about the fact that it was a multi-pronged attack. A dive attack on commercial, a dive attack on those targets, plus an attack on the ground, on the infrastructure, and all coordinated through one entity. So in closing, and this comes from the Russians, they were a deeply specialized reconnaissance and sabotage unit, capable for a long time, and Mark, I'm reading this so that you understand this, and I'll read it again. They were a deeply specialized reconnaissance and sabotage unit, capable for a long time to act in isolation from the main forces in enemy's territory, often relying only on themselves. Commandos of the Defence Force of South Africa not only developed their own extremely effective and ruthless system of selection and training, but also enriched tactics by specific techniques and modes of action. From a professional point of view, their experience is invaluable and unique. That comes from the Russians, not us. So, where does this all come from? I think many of you know the book that Doe put out, Doe and Arne Sutherland. How did we get to be able to do this? So if you read the chapters in here, and I'll give you my story. Doe and I are good friends. He was the OCO 4-1, I was the OCO 4-2 commander. I first worked under him as a team leader. And one day he said to me, I was at his house, and he said to me, Pierre, all these files are your files from your time as an operations commander. Write me the story of every single one of them. So we wrote the stories, what we had, how we went through the planning and everything of that. That was all then brought together with Arne Sutherland from the Navy, where they matched everything with all the Navy logs and everything that they had. And that's how this book was put together. So everything in here is date, time, everything according to the ship logs and everything. There are 86 operations in there. This book is now used in West Point and the Brits as a textbook for seaborne operations in their institutions. So, you know, and it's actually a privilege to have been part of that. Then, in closing, we have our Special Forces. Mark, won't you come up here, please? Or somebody just help Mark. So we have our Special Forces memorials. This is the one at Forekkie, which I decided to put this one up because this is where it is over this side. Please, George. George, on this side. And I just want to share that with you. Even if I'm called upon to perform tasks in isolation and in extreme conditions, I'm willing to pay the ultimate price. And I want to share with you a video. So just bear with me as I just get to it.
I am a special forces operator. I will go where others fear to go. I will do what others cannot do. I will face the impossible and triumph over. I seek neither fame nor glory. I seek neither medals nor praise. I seek only the acknowledgement of my brother operators, for they alone can judge me, and to be counted amongst them is my greatest honor. I will never dishonor my brothers for the name of special forces. I will never turn away from any challenge. I will face anything and succeed. Nothing will stop me save death, and even this will be temporary. My memory will spur my brothers on. I will at all times uphold the principles that guide us: duty, honor, and loyalty. The highest code of morals, principles, and ethics. I will never abandon my post or turn from my duty, no matter the consequences. I will always remember my brothers who have made the supreme sacrifice. They will be with me at all times in my thoughts and prayers. Their deeds will not go unrecorded, and their songs will not go unsung. Their memory will inspire me constantly. I know that wherever I am, whatever the situation, I am always in my brother's thoughts and prayers. And if ever my need is near me, I know that my brother operators will always come to my aid, swiftly, regardless of danger or risk, to stand by my side and help me. And knowing this gives me strength to face anything, anywhere, at any time, resolutely, with courage and determination. For I am proud to say that I stand counted amongst those few, those brave and elite few, silent and unseen, but ever present, who can truly say, we fear naught but God. For I am a special forces operator.
Thanks, guys, and thanks for the opportunity. I just wanted to check if there are any questions. Any questions or comments?
It was the name of the vote of the son. Is that
Yes.
the doctor?
No, that's Bas Person. That's Wouter Person. There's two Wouter Persons. Bas Person, we call him Bas. He was a captain at 180, and Dr. Wouter Person. Dr. Wouter Person is actually doing a talk under Special Forces at the moment, Weapons of Mass Destruction in Pretoria, I think next month or this month. Next month. So if people get the chance to go and see that, it's going to be quite a talk. I'll send the link to it on the group.
I just wanted to find out if this ops was planned in combination with the one in 85 that went further north, or if it was planned afterwards because of what happened in 85.
It was planned after 85. If you go, you're talking about Argon.
Yes.
And at the same time that Argon was going in, Phoenix was going in. And then the balls have happened on Argon. Phoenix was pulled. I think this could have been probably, barring one or two, this could have been the next big one. Any other questions?
The Russian movie, where can you get that Russian movie? Is it on YouTube?
I will see where I can get the link. I'll get the link to Steve. Yeah.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. I think it's an interesting movie to see. Especially though waltzing around in Russia. And, yeah. Maximus, by the way, thank you for that. No, it's a Russian movie. You won't find it. It has now already been translated. Yeah. Any other questions?
Hello, I'm in Melbourne. I was the Navy lady.
Yes.
And it's quite delightful for me to see the names because many of them I work with and Brian Lonk and actually I reported to. But I just really truly want to share with you that clue from the submarine when you've been at sea for so many days. And you come alongside. I don't know, did you come alongside in Austria? And they've got the specific submarine duty.
Yeah.
I was on duty one night and the submarine came alongside. And as that hatch opened, there was like this blue plume that came out. And everybody runs in different directions because, as you say, the ocean is nonsense. But it was great for me as a Navy person to actually see working together.
Yeah.
I think too often we work in our little silos and we actually don't realize how well we work as a team. And thank you, I certainly enjoyed listening to you.
I think one of the things that a lot of people don't understand, and a lot of people never knew, was how 480 actually functioned and how we execute. And you know, a lot of people will ask me, but were you in the Navy? No. We did our training in the Army. We still had to go and do formative course and combat team commanders and combat group commanders and all that like that, and then do this work as well. So, but the relationship us officers at 480 had with the Navy, like for instance, Doe, and I think one other, they went into the Naval Staff course. So, yeah, they're special.
Sorry, how's it? Just wondering, the Russian diver went in and moved a couple of living mines and hadn't gone. What boats are those attached and what would the then impact be?
Those boats had gone off already. There was one or two that didn't go off, and in actual fact, when you watch I'll get the movie to the guys. You watch how we built, when the Russians came, we built the dummy mine for them. And and Maxim actually showed us how they took it off them. So what they did was they managed to get some rope around it, and then they took that rope for a long way onto a boat, and then they pulled it to flick it off. So that's the way that they could get it off. And I think they recovered one or two. Sometimes in those type of operations, it's very difficult to understand exactly how these things are going to work in different sea conditions and things like that. So sometimes they don't actually work. Very interesting thing what happened recently is I was contacted out of the Netherlands to consult to an engineering consulting team who were going to look at the dredging of that harbour. Because all of a sudden they became aware that we had done some of these things, so I had to give them some input into what happened in '86, and I did this last year for them. So it's interesting.
What was the weight a diver carried, more or less, when he did such an operation?
So probably with all your kit, all your rebreather, all your kit, etc., probably 40 kilos just on your dive kit, plus the mines, 10 kilos per mine. But remember, so it's the buoyancy compensator is working, so you are, when you're in the water, you're zero.
You really had to know where everything was exact.
So and that's what people got to understand. The dive team doing that type of operation, the amount of preparation that they got to do to get themselves ready for that. Not only to understand what's going on, to work all their systems, their dive systems, to work their survival systems, and now you've also got to arm the slip and mine and do it properly and all that type of stuff. And there's specific ways of doing these things. All right.
Thank you. Mark would like to know whether you guys ever used the Oswald Piro strike craft.
Oswald Piro?
Yeah.
Oswald Piro, I think, went with us on one or two. So, did you ask that question, Mark?
So on this one was Kruby Kutsia and Hendrik Mens, and then Brian Donkin was driving 1561. I'll tell you another story of Gert Engelbrecht. I was coming back from the East Coast with him, and then we were coming down past Neisner, and he had to go into Neisner, so we dropped off a boat so he could go into Neisner. Took him on the boat, and I decided I'm going to go on the boat with him as well. And then when we came back outside the heads, it was quite rough. And so they throw the net out, and we come alongside the net, and then you scramble up the net onto the thing, and then we let the boat go, and then the boat will come up the ramp. But Gert Engelbrecht, besides a couple of things that he always had bookums in his cabin, he was also a stickler for tradition. So when the captain comes on board from anything, they pipe him. Okay, so as soon as the bosun pipes, everybody stands to attention. And Gert was clambering up this net, and the boats were doing this. And as he put out his hand to grab, the captain was coming on board, the pipe, and Gert grabbed, and he missed into the sea. Turned the boat round, recovering, and much swearing and muttering, and we got him on, and then nobody.
Anyway, all right, guys, that's me, Flight Mysterious 8. Thank you.
Good evening, guys. Thank you very much for all being here. The brothers, the ladies, and other guests. Really great to have you all here. My name is Adam Montiel. I'm the current chairman of our PVO. And so, not having seen too many of these, it's really good to see you all here. And all I can say is, having done our time on the border, and that I'm always amazed by every time what I hear about what our Special Forces guys did. And as the years go by, we hear more of these stories, and it's so good to hear one that comes, and all these that come out of the mouth of the guys who did it. So Pierre and Mark, thank you very much for your service, and may God bless you and your families. Thank you. This is a challenge medal that is printed here by our PVO, and just as a gift and a momentum to Pierre, thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Sibambaneni wema wethu wemaduku, sugcineni amasiko ethu wemaduku, size sishiyela mizana. Asiwagcineni amasiko ethu wemaduku, thina siwagcineni amasiko ethu wemaduku, size sishiyela abantwana.